Welcome to Tabletop Gaming Guild. Tabletop Gaming Guild is all about the experience and memories that playing tabletop games with friends and families can create. They were looking at Sword and Sorcery, designed by Simone Ramona, Nunzio Cerese, and published by Ares Games. Sword and Sorcery is a dungeon delve game that feels like it was inspired largely by Bloodborne. You have recently expired, is on the verge between humanity and being a soul. There are so many components for this game. I normally would have like the board out, the cover out, showing, and all the components out. I just got through a playthrough and I'm just kind of left everything as is because there's too much. It's already too cluttered with just the few components I have out. With that said, before your first game, there's a couple things you have to do. First off, you have to build these soul gems for your 4 different characters, and basically you have a double-sided for your 2 possible class for that character, and just stick them together and with a post. And you have to do that for each character. You're also just putting your doors on standees, and then you're ready for the setup for your first game. There's a fair amount to that setup though, so let's get into it. First thing you're going to do is want to make sure you have out your rulebook, storybook, and book of secrets. And have those where anybody can reach them. The actual setup is going to be split between the basic rules and the scenario setup. So first you're going to have to go through your basic setup, then your scenario setup. This rulebook does do something that's somewhat helpful because it's such a massive rulebook, which typically this type of a game is. It has color-coded sections. It has green sections for, general rules, blue for hero rules, and red for enemy rules. So obviously one player is going to have to know this whole thing really well, but you could, if you wanted to, have the other players just read through the hero rules, just so they have an idea what you're doing, so you're not having to teach everything. Even having read through all these rules, there's just a lot, and then if you watch my playthrough, it's easy to forget things and you're going to constantly have to refer to this rulebook. For the first game of a campaign, you're going to need to each select characters and take the hero card, soul gems, hero figure, and hero sheet. If you happen to be playing this game solo, there is a minimum of 2 heroes required, so you will have to play 2 different heroes on your own. After selecting your heroes, you'll get to select from one of 2 classes. The classes will be tied to one of 3 alignments, either good, neutral, or evil, but bear in mind, you must match up your alignments with the other players. You cannot have good and evil in the same campaign, but you can have good and neutral or evil and neutral. The scenario may also give you soul gems to start off and money to start off with. And outside the first scenario, they mostly give you a chance to go to the Emporium to buy equipment. Then open your storybook and retrieve the designated enemies with their figures and cards. Build the event deck as specified. Usually you're getting 1 or 2 at a time, shuffling those together, then getting the next set, putting it on top, until you've built a deck of events. It also may specify one event to be already revealed at the start of the game. If so, that will usually dictate whether it's day or night. And the scenario effects will say what effects are active. Bear in mind, any day or night effect lasts until something tells you to switch the time. There are some events or things you can encounter that are day-night specific. If you're not in the right time, you may be instructed to ignore that effect. The scenario may also ask you to put various markers on the board to indicate where story events happen or waypoints are triggered. These may be fixed or randomized, so make sure you read carefully. The setup will then guide you through what map pieces to put on the board, where to put doors, where to put markers, all the various other tokens. You'll take all the enemy cards specified in the setup and shuffle those together to make an enemy deck. So let's take a look at the map. It is very important to be aware of where sections are divided. Each area can be distinguished in 3 ways. Either the topsoil, visual representation of the ground has changed, so that would indicate you're traveling to another area. The floor pattern has changed, so for example, going from this triangle pattern to just stone tiles. Or there's repeated ornaments that basically form a line like these stones. Each area will also have a X on it, and that is used for tracing your line of sight. It'll also help you distinguish between areas. So basically, to determine if you have line of sight, if you can trace from specifically that X to the X in the area you're trying to shoot into, you have line of sight. It doesn't matter where you are within that square as long as you're within that area. So in other words, exact positioning of your mini is not relevant to line of sight. It's from that area to this area. Any hard lines and the edge of the board all indicate walls. You cannot move through these, and they do break a line of sight. So even if you can trace from one X to the one you're trying to hit without going off the board, if it would require you to go through a hard line, you would not have line of sight. All heroes and enemies can only see max of 5 spaces away, so all line of sight and all rules will never exceed beyond 5. An area can be controlled or dominated. If one side has more figures than another in an area, it is considered controlled. If they have at least twice as many figures, then they're considered dominant, which gives them an advantage in combat. However, bear in mind, if a figure has been knocked out, it does not count towards that dominance, and most allies also don't count as figures. You'll also note that there's various spots on the board that have boots on it that indicate hindrance. So you may see tiles with a blue boot with an X on it. That indicates an area that has a one-directional barrier, so characters or enemies cannot cross from the area that has that symbol to the adjacent area, but they can go the other direction. This does not block line of sight and is still considered adjacent, so ranged players can still attack across it. If you see a can boot, that is a hindrance that only affects players, meaning they need to use 2 movements to move into or through that location, but they do not have to use that any extra movement for leaving there. If you see a tan scroll with a heart on it, any heroes take damage for entering or moving through that area. You also will find various doors. There's 2 types of doors. There's unlocked doors and locked doors. Unlocked doors are a free action to open, but you have to draw a trap to see if the door is trapped. However, locked doors are a full action, and you still have to draw to see if there was a trap. Chests are also handled like locked doors, where it takes an action to open them, and you have to draw for traps. But once you've done that, you'll flip it over, and it'll instruct you to either draw a treasure card or draw a certain amount of money. Incidentally, money is called crowns in this game. Some doors and chests may have magic locks. In order to open them, you first have to have the matching key. It takes a free action to use that key. Then after that, you interact with that object as per normal. You may also find search tokens. If you want to interact with the search token, it takes an action. Then you flip it and roll a red die and match the icon rolled to the reward indicated on the search token. If the symbol you rolled is not on that search token, you simply get nothing. Nothing happens whatsoever. During setup, you may also be instructed to add extra walls, and they just function like any other wall. So we've talked about traps a lot, so let's look at what those look like. You may get lucky and draw a no trap, but otherwise you're going to be drawing a card that gives you an area effect and an effect. So it'll say all heroes within a certain range are going to have said effect. Most traps will require a save, in which case you'll be rolling the blue dice and looking at your character and seeing what symbol they require to be successful in that save. So when determining distances, a 0 means only the area you're in, 1 means 1 area away, 2 is 2, and so forth. When you're selecting your hero, your first thing is going to pick one of 2 classes, and these are going to either be good, neutral, or evil, bearing in mind that all players have to match. If one player picks a good class, all other players have to pick good or neutral. There are variant rules that allow you to ignore this. You'll also typically start your first game at 1 soul rank, and that soul rank, if you look at your soul coin, will dictate your starting health, how many combat actions you get, how many regular actions you get, and how many skill cards you get. Then you're going to want to look through your skill deck and pick the number equal to what your soul gem allows that are also within your current rank. If there is a star next to this symbol, you can also choose from the generic skills. If you have any weapons, you can equip them before the game, but you have to bear in mind that the weapons symbols, the rune symbols on the top of the weapons, at least one of them must match the rune symbol on your character. You'll also have to note whether this can be equipped as a primary weapon, two-handed weapon, or secondary weapon. Obviously, if it's a two-handed weapon, it's the only weapon you can equip. You can then may equip armor that matches your rune symbol, and that goes on the left side of your player board. Note the asterisk means any style, but the X means an exception. You can also equip artifacts and have unequipped gear equal to the number listed by the bag on your card. You'll also be given a bookmark that is basically used to indicate if you're taking your turn yet this round. Your character card will indicate your name and class, and have a rune to indicate your fighting style. Give you your basic ability, and on the bottom it'll list how many unequipped items you can carry, what symbol you have to roll to be successful in saves, and how many movement you get per turn. Your hero powers will list what type of activity it's required to activate this power, what soul nature you require to be to even have this power, how much cooldown it takes, so basically once you've used this power, how many rounds it is before you get that power back. You also have the soul rank that is required and text specifying what the power does. Some player powers will refer to companion. Companions function like other powers, but the cooldown does not trigger until that companion has passed. The other thing to note on companions, they do not count as active players on the field, so they will not cause you to summon more enemies. On the top of a weapon card, it'll specify the name and type of weapon it is, and give you runes to indicate which fighting styles are able to use this. In the middle of the card, it'll indicate whether it's a primary weapon, secondary weapon, or two-handed weapon. Below that, it will specify the range at which this weapon can be used, what dice you have to roll, and automatic hits, if any. Some weapons will also have powers, for which you can spend symbols that you've rolled to activate. Beyond that, if it's not a basic starter weapon, it will have a cost, what the cost it would take to buy this at the Emporium. And most weapons can be flipped at the Emporium using the forge functions. However, bear in mind forging only lasts for one game. So if you want a forged weapon, you have to spend that after every game. At the beginning of every game, rather. Outside of your first game, you'll typically be visiting the Emporium before each quest. At the Emporium, you can sell any treasure cards for the value indicated on the card. You can swap any items from your stash. You can also buy any items or equipment that have an Emporium cost, as well as visiting the Enchanted Anvil, which allows you to spend 50 crowns to flip a weapon to the forge side. Again, remember that this only lasts for the one scenario, so if you want to keep that weapon as a forged weapon, you're going to have to spend the 50 again for your next scenario. You can also choose to gamble at the Rising Pony Tavern. You'll spend 5 money and roll the blue dice, but before you roll the dice, you're going to have to predict what symbol will be rolled. Within a scenario, you'll be resolving the set game sequence. First is time, then battle, then events. Let's break down the time phase. During the time phase, you'll do effects cleanup, power refresh, power cooldown, soul enhancements, and resurrections. These will be done in this specific order. And within the first step, the effects cleanup, you're also going to be doing in this specific order: apply damages, apply other effects, clean up and refresh, and flip your bookmark. Apply damage is any ongoing effect, such as fire, which typically tick down with each turn. Other effects are just going to be whatever the text on those effects say. Clean up and refresh typically is referring to specific items or magic shields that have essentially another cooldown. Powers themselves have their own cooldown, and it's very important that you resolve these in order, because if cooldown is over, this is where you would refresh. But if it's not, then you get to tick it down. Cooldown is tracked by using the reverse side of the card, and basically you're going to rotate at 90 degrees for each time you progress on the cooldown. Once it gets to the last step on the cooldown, you know next turn you're going to refresh it. Next, you have a chance to spend your soul coins. These can be sent to rank up your soul gem or resurrect fallen allies. Bear in mind that all soul points are shared among all players. However, no one player can be more than one rank above any other player, so you can't just give all the soul points to constantly upgrade one character. The cost to rank up is equal to the rank you're going to times itself. So if you're going to level 2, it's going to cost you 2 times 2, so 4 soul points to rank up to level 2, 9 for level 3, and so forth. When you rank up, you're going to rotate your soul gem to the next level, and this may unlock extra health, extra combat, extra actions, or extra skills. But beyond that, a lot of abilities will require a certain soul rank, or some items will actually get better with higher soul rank. You know, various effects can actually be improved by having a higher soul rank. Last thing you can do during the time phase is resurrect. So if you have a dead character that is currently at an active shrine, they can spend soul points equal to their soul rank to resurrect. When they resurrect, they get all their health back and can take their turn normally. So that is time phase, which is done simultaneously by all players, which again is effects cleanup, power refresh, power cooldown, and spending soul gems. Then you get into the battle phase, which is done one hero at a time. During a turn, you'll have a hero action and an enemy action, for all of which you will be considered the active player. During a player turn, you can do movement, combat, action, and free actions in any order. At higher soul ranks, you may be getting multiple combats and multiple actions, but that'll be indicated on your soul gem. For your movement, you may move the number specified on your card. However, you can break that number up as long as you don't do combat. If you do combat in the middle of your movement, you lose any remaining movement. One thing to bear in mind during your movement is you need to keep track of your line of sight, because if you ever have line of sight with a shadow, it is immediately revealed. If it is a citizen, unless the scenario says otherwise, you will simply discard that token. If it is an enemy, you will draw 1 or 2 enemies, depending on how many enemy symbols are on the shadow. And it may also indicate that enemy gets an additional power, so you'll have to draw a power card for that enemy. If your movement takes you onto a story event or waypoint, you immediately resolve that story before continuing your movement. Do not forget to pay attention to the blocks and hindrances on the board. However, if you have flying, you may be able to ignore these. If you try to leave an area containing enemies, you must evade, which basically means each enemy gets a reaction attack against you. However, if you're currently dominating that area, meaning you have 2 times as many figures as there are enemies, you can ignore those attacks. If you are in a space with that enemy, you can only attack the enemies in your space, even if you have ranged abilities. First, you must determine if you have dominance in an area. If you have dominance, you get +1 hit to that enemy. Choose an enemy to attack and the weapon you're going to use to attack it with. That weapon will designate what dice you roll, determine how many hits you get, and activate any effects. Bear in mind that each effect can only be activated once, so even if you have enough icons to activate it twice, you can't. If you get multiple attacks, however, on the new rolls, you can use those effects again. Finally, you will calculate your number of hits and then go into the enemy's defense phase. You will look at the enemy's strength and weaknesses, so this will indicate whether to subtract or add extra hits. Subtract damage for armor. However, if the enemy is currently KO'd, you would ignore the armor. Finally, they would roll the dice specified on their armor. However, no matter how many dice they get, it cannot exceed the damage they received. So if you're only doing 2 damage and the armor gives 3 defense, you're still only rolling 2 dice to negate those 2 damage. Finally, you will calculate how many shields they have, subtract that from the damage dealt, and get your final damage. Bear in mind there are some abilities that give unblockable damage, so you will not roll to protect against these. Next, let's talk about actions. Again, typically early campaigns, you're only going to get 1 action, which is going to be indicated on your soul gem by the combined triangle symbol. Those actions can be either dash, open a chest or lock door, focus on attack, reorganize the items you have equipped, exchange with another player, search, provoke a boss, or perform a quest action. A dash action can be used to stand after being KO'd, or get 1 extra movement during their movement. Regardless of how many actions you have, you can only dash once per round. Opening a chest or locked door are a full action, and you still have to draw to see if there was a trap. You can do focus to add 1 damage to your next attack. Reorganizing your equipment allows you to change what items you have equipped on your character, but you still have to follow the item restrictions. Exchanging items, you can exchange 1 item and as much money as you want with another character that's in your space. If the slot for that equipment is empty, you can equip it for free, otherwise you have to take a reorganize action to equip it. Searching, we've already described, is basically you're going to take an action to flip a search token and roll the dice to see what you get. Provoking a boss, we'll have to talk about later when we get into menace tokens, but let's leave that aside for now. So once again, the actions you can take are dash, open a chest or door, increase your damage by focusing an attack, reorganize your equipment, exchange with another player, or search. You also may take any number of free actions throughout your turn, which can be opening unlocked doors, picking up or dropping items, or evading enemies. There may also be quest-specific or scenario-specific actions you can take, as well as powers or items that require actions. So that concludes the hero turn. So once again, in the hero turn you have your movement, your action, your combat, and your free actions that can be taken in any order. At the end of each hero turn, you will have an enemy turn. So long as there is at least one enemy on the board, you will draw an encounter card. With the exception if your current player is ghost or deceased state, you do not draw an encounter, regardless if there's enemies on the board. When you draw an encounter card, it will specify the type of enemy that it gets activated. It may be a fighting style or a specific color. It'll also give you text that will only occur if there are no enemies that satisfy that criteria. The enemy will have a figure, a scroll to determine its action, and an enemy card to determine its strengths and abilities. Once you determine what enemies activate, you would then look at their enemy card, determine their distance to determine what actions they take. If you have multiple enemies, make sure you're using the right scroll card. The enemies are distinguished by their minifig colors, red being the most elite, blue being normal, and green being weakest. Look at the top left seal on their scroll card to indicate the color that is paired with. In the top left, it has a preferred victim. This could be a fighting style or the one with the most money or the most injured. If there are multiple preferred victims at the same distance, then you would look at there is actually a chain of priority that you can look up in the rulebook. For enemy movement, they will take the shortest route possible after considering hindrances that aren't ignored. They do ignore difficult and deadly terrain. If directed, they can move away from heroes and do not have to evade to do so. As far as the order in which enemies activate, they're activated based on which player they are assigned to. We'll get into assignment later, but basically the active player activates one of their enemies first, and you keep going around until all relevant enemies are activated. If a player has more than one enemy assigned to him, you activate them in rank order. Any enemy combat actions are done in the same way as hero combat actions. On the enemy scroll, it has the preferred victim in the top left, so basically who it will target if there are multiple targets of equal distance. Next, it has the rank, so the color signifying the rank of the enemy, which will match up with the color of the figure. You have the name and race, then you have fighting style and challenge level. You already understand fighting style. Challenge level is only applied if you have an expansion for the game. Next, you have its AI, so basically what actions it will take based on the distance it is from its target. Finally, you have its powers that can be always active. It can be movement-based, combat-based, defensive-based, range-based. The enemy card will also have its preferred victim, name and race, rank, fighting style, powers, weaknesses and resistances, armors, magic shields, defensive values. On the bottom, it will have its health, items dropped if defeated, and soul points gained for defeating it. Each creature may have multiple skill sets, even among a specific rank, so make sure to keep track of which figure each card applies to. Once you've taken the actions of all enemies designated by the encounter card, repeat the battle phase with another hero turn and enemy in turn until all heroes have taken their turn, in which case you would progress on to the event phase. In the event phase, if there is no revealed event, you would flip the top event and activate it. If there is already a revealed event, you would simply set that aside into the event discard pile. In short, this typically means that an event is resolved every other round. You have 3 types of event cards. You have standard event cards, story event cards, and night-day event cards. Standard event cards will have text describing what happens, and if there's any bold text, that text will remain ongoing until either the card is discarded or covered. Story events are typically triggered from something going on in the game. These go on top of the deck face up, covering the current event. And since the event deck is also a timer for the end of the game, they essentially end up lengthening the game. They will also cause a temporary pause to any ongoing effects on the current event, and typically refer to the Book of Secrets to tell you what is happening. Night and day events will go beside the deck, and their effects will be based on the night and day effects on the scenario. Some player abilities may also refer to having differences based on night and day. When a night and day effect is drawn, you also draw the next event card and resolve it. Since the event night and day is next to the deck and not in the discard, it remains active until another night day card is drawn. One more thing to talk about on event cards. A lot of event cards will tell you to spawn enemies. If it does, it'll typically specify player count and a formula to determine how many enemies spawn. They'll generally be determined by how many active heroes there are, subtracted by how many active enemies there are, and sometimes given an additional multiplier of -1 or +1. When an enemy is spawned, you will draw a enemy card and assign it to the first player in turn order that doesn't currently have an enemy assigned. If all heroes have enemies assigned, you would continue adding additional enemies to the active player, and again turn order, till they are as even as possible, with the exception of if multiple enemies are drawn with the same type and rank, they are always assigned to the same hero. When an enemy is killed, it goes into a discard, and if the enemy deck is empty when spawned, those discards get shuffled back in. However, if there is no enemy deck or discard, you simply cannot spawn enemies. If a spawn calls for a specific enemy, you must dig through the deck until you find that, and then if your deck is empty, you would shuffle again. You may eventually encounter master enemies, so these are the big bosses of a scenario. The card for the master enemy has all the same information as a basic enemy, but with much better stats and powers. However, they may also have immunities, which are the inability of having certain status effects, so you may not be able to stun this particular enemy. Bosses may also have the Vengeful ability, which will assign menace tokens to heroes. The number of menace tokens a hero has determines the targeting of that boss. When the boss enters play, they automatically give 1 menace token to the active player. Players may also take an action to menace the boss, gaining themselves a menace token or decreasing it from another player. If the player with the highest menace token does damage to the enemy, they increase their menace by 1. If any other player does damage, they decrease the menace on the menacing player by 1. If that menace is reduced to 0, it is transferred to the player that did the damage. If the player with the menacing token is killed, that player can choose which other player to pass the menace to. So that is the sequence of a round. At the end of the round, you will see if the game has ended. Typically, a scenario will have a quest and storyline that will determine how the scenario is ended. But unless specified, there are always two basic fail conditions. Either you've gone through all the events and cannot draw another event, or all heroes have died and are currently in ghost form. If a hero is killed and run out of health, they flip their hero card to the ghost side and reduce their soul rank by 1, but they cannot go below 1. They must then discard all effects and modifiers on their hero, and if they have any powers that they're no longer high enough rank for, those are discarded as well. All money and non-equipped items that they are currently carrying are dropped in their location. Now, if you look on the go side of the player card, their actions are now restricted. The other thing to note that they no longer count towards active players on the field, and they no longer draw enemy cards at the end of their turn. They also can no longer use items or powers, but the cooldown still will tick up at the beginning of each turn. Player in ghost form has 3 possible actions that they can only do once each, in any order they want. They have Soul Shout, Recall, and Move. Soul Shout is just following the text on their particular ghost card, which is specific to the character and the class. Recall means they go back to an active shrine of their choice. And moving, they count as flying. However, they cannot interact with the world. So they can fly through walls, but they can't open doors, chests, or trigger events, or reveal shadows. At the beginning of each turn, a hero that's in ghost form may choose to resurrect if they're at an active shrine. The cost of that is equal to their current soul rank. When they resurrect, you flip your card back over and gain all your health back. However, all your dropped items are still on the map where you left them, so you'll have to go back to retrieve them. Magic shields basically count as shields with charges. You get a certain amount of charges per round, and once you're out of charges, you cannot use those shields anymore. Now, some items will also have charges. Once these charges are used up, they can no longer be used in that scenario. Each item recovers 1 charge at the beginning of a scenario. Some other terms you will need to know is critical. A critical hit means that if you've scored at least 1 hit on that enemy, you would draw a critical hit token to now debuff that enemy. Enemies can have multiple critical hit tokens on them, but they can never have 2 of the same. If they ever draw a second of the same critical hit, they will discard it and suffer 1 damage instead. Bash can force an enemy back a space as long as you've dealt at least 1 damage. Fire has cooldown, so basically if it's a fire 2, that means it will stay there for 2 turns, degrading once each round. AoEs damage all enemies within a radius. Lethal damage cannot be blocked by standard shields. It can only be blocked by magic shields or resistances and powers that block damage. KO'd means they cannot perform attack actions, and their armor is not counted in their defense. That unit also counts as a 0 towards how many active figures there are on the board. The KO is removed by simply spending 1 movement through your dash actions or your basic movement. Poison does damage every turn until you roll a successful save against it to remove it. Blinded means the hero has to roll a successful save before any activity they attempt. Lasts until the end of the figure's turn. If a hero is slowed, it can take as many free actions as it wants, but only can take 1 main action of movement, combat, or action. And if they're stunned, they just simply lose their turn. So that's all the rules for Sword and Sorcery. There are a lot of rules, so hopefully I didn't miss anything, but always be aware of Any rules on cards or in the story campaign do override rules as written in the rulebook.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to like and subscribe.